Um, okay, so I don't know if there were questions specifically for you through the Slido app, but maybe, Stan, when you get those, you can send them in to us as well. Thank you so much for your address. Very interesting points, Dan. I was very taken by the last one, which was about unlocking the genius in, I presume you're talking about auditors in general, are you? Yes, okay.
Yes, of course.
So in terms of, I suppose, the overall theme today, which is about, foresight in particular, how do you unlock the geniuses in people in the internal auditing world as they embrace much more sort of foresight policies?
I think most specifically for any leadership in internal audit, it is to not shut down your team. Don't shut down somebody who keeps asking questions. Find something for them to do that is relevant to the questions that they're asking. If they're asking questions within your team, then there's probably something that is bothering them or that isn't working well, and let them explore it. Find a way for them to explore the end of their questions rather than just shutting down questions.
And just maybe, do you want to change the mic? Oh, okay. So I don't think my mic, no, this is working now. You can hear me okay now? I think the batteries have got the best of my, the headset mic. Okay, but at least you can hear me. So Dan, just maybe I can tease that out a little bit more then. If you were to deliver just maybe one key message to internal auditors on how they could adapt in their teams for the challenges ahead, what would it be?
It would be know the value of your products and services. Be willing to challenge yourself to say, hey, this report or this attendance that I keep doing on a quarterly basis to this meeting, what is the value of that? And we need to ask that question more and more. If we don't ask that question, I think we expose ourselves to being disrupted. And somebody saying, we don't need you in this committee meeting anymore. Your products aren't meeting our needs. I think we have to do that first. There's so many opportunities, so much content out there. I think we need to be ahead, as was said earlier, 5 steps ahead. We need to be ahead of the question of whether or not we're adding value.
Do you see the world of, because you mainly work in the US and US systems, is the world of the internal audit process, the system, is it radically different to that happens in Europe, for example?
Don't know as much about Europe. I think the big difference that I've seen is government can be different. A policy-driven organization is a little bit different because policies are harder to manage, and sometimes policies can be siloed rather than a business or a cascading strategic plan coming down from a corporation. Usually is pretty well aligned, and so it's a bit more of a challenge in a government agency to think about how is the policy aligned. And I think that is a challenge to any. I did work for the state of Texas in the higher education, and it was a challenge there, and I would assume that it's a challenge here.
Okay, we've got a couple of questions in through Slido. What is the difference between a risk-based auditor and an objective-based auditor? And how would you explain that to a CEO, and indeed, how would you explain it to a 6-year-old?
Wow, that's a challenge. Objective-based means, think of a risk assessment. If you're doing a risk assessment, where do you start? Are you starting with a risk, or are you starting with the business's objectives? If you're starting with the objectives and you're saying which of those objectives are the most critical and the most are of the highest interest to leadership, then you're objective-based. And then you say, now that I think of it almost as scoping your risk assessment based on the fact that you have a strong understanding of the objectives of the organization, and because you have limited time, you're going to focus on 10 of the top 15 objectives of the organization in your risk assessment. That's being objective-based. Risk-based is a bit more of what could go wrong. Well, a lot of things could go wrong, and sometimes that long list of things that could go wrong is relevant, and sometimes it's not as relevant.
Okay, quick response to the second, and we leave it at that. The profile of the future auditor sounds very aspirational. Is that realistic?
Everything takes time. I have seen change happen. I have also learned that change, there's a good project management rule out there that says if you're going to change more than 10% of what you're doing today, then plan to be re-engineering, because you're disrupting your entire year. And sometimes we can disrupt because we want to take such a big leap forward, but we need to be ready to do that. And sometimes that means we're going to change staffing, we're going to train, we're going to just spend a whole year being very intensive about re-engineering what we're doing. But most of the time, we're not in a position where we can re-engineer. And so we have to pick one or two things to focus on. And then over a 3 to 5 year period, you can start making a significant difference.
Okay, Dan, thank you so much for that. A big warm appreciation for Dan's.